Prise de débat, the honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to rise today to speak on the second part of the government's budget implementation bill, Bill C-29. The second budget bill contains the technical legislative amendments that will make Budget 2016 law. Madam Speaker, I could get into great detail about these technical amendments. It's an area that has been of particular interest to me as a trained economist, someone who sat on the Canadian Accounting Standard Board's User Advisory Council for many years, and someone who understands the importance of a strong banking system with relevant, proper oversight. Prior to being elected to Parliament, I had more than 2 decades of experience in the global financial markets, first in New York City working for JP Morgan for nearly a decade in corporate finance, then in Canada where I was employed by Dominion Bond Rating Service with responsibility of coverage of the global auto sector, and then as a corporate debt analyst for Scotiabank with coverage of over 100 companies, and where the market value of the Canadian corporate debt market stands today at $418 billion. So I could tell you about specific technical elements of the bill, that deal with changes of the Income Tax Act, which exclude derivatives from the application of inventory valuation rules, or ensures that the return on linked note retains the same character, whether it's earned at maturity or reflected in a secondary market sale. Or I could talk at great length about the amendments to the Bank Act to consolidate and streamline provisions that apply to a bank or an authorized foreign bank in relation to the protection of customers and the public. But as much as these concerns are of great interest to me and as important as they are, I know I put many people here potentially to sleep. Madam Speaker, while the items contained in the legislation may not be the most exciting things, I can't stress enough about the importance of getting the fundamental economic variables correct. That means ensuring that all the technical elements are there and that all the regulations and legislation are in place to help move the Canadian economy and the country forward. I am very proud of our government's commitment to Canada's economic and fiscal strength, to tax fairness and a strong financial sector. But perhaps most of all, Madam Speaker, I am proud, Madam Speaker, to our commitment to helping the middle class and those working hard to join it. I know that a strong economy starts with a strong middle class. While Canadians have more money to save, invest, and grow the economy, everyone benefits. Strengthening the middle class means that hardworking Canadians can look forward to a good standard of living and better prospects for their kids. But for too long, Madam Speaker, many Canadians have been working harder than ever without getting further ahead. I'm proud that our government has recognized this and is taking concrete steps to address them. Certainly the measures contained in Budget 2016 were designed to set the stage for future growth. There is a growing consensus, both here in Canada and around the globe, that governments need to invest, not only to boost short-term economic growth, but to set the stage for long-term growth as well. We know that when we have historically low interest rates and when the debt-to-GDP ratio is the lowest of any G7 country, we know we have the fiscal capacity, and it is a perfect time to invest in infrastructure. And when talking about infrastructure, I'm not talking simply about roads and bridges, which are very important. I'm also talking about our social, health, and educational infrastructure. Madam Speaker, investing in infrastructure will boost Canada's productivity, strengthening our economic foundation, and put us on a higher growth path trajectory. As commented recently by Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz, in the case of a targeted investment by government, which is identified in such a way that it will be growth enabling, it's very likely to pay off very well, he said. That is, it creates more economic growth for all those that use that infrastructure, and that, of course, creates tax revenues and the system keeps turning. Those aren't my words, Madam Speaker. Those are the Bank of Canada governors. In my constituency of Vaughan Woodbridge, which incidentally, the City of Vaughan is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, we have experienced unprecedented levels of growth. Vaughan is the largest employment centre in York Region, accounting for 38% of jobs, with over 10,000 businesses employing more than 194,000 people. The City of Vaughan is ranked the second best place in Ontario to do business, and amongst the top 25 best places to live in Canada. But while our community has grown, much of the federal infrastructure has not kept pace. Since our government took over, we've seen real substantial investment in Canada's physical, green, and social infrastructure. We've doubled funding for Canada's student jobs, increased funding for New Horizons Seniors grants, and boosted FedDev assistance to several businesses in my riding of Vaughan Woodbridge, including Cutler Forestry Products. And just a few weeks ago, in my riding at the Courtright Centre, I, along with my colleague from Hamilton, announced a $4.3 million FedDev grant to Mohawk College for the development of new green energy solutions, a very real and tangible example of our government's commitment to clean, innovative technology. Madam Speaker, in my constituency, we have a lot of young families, which is one of the many realities that attracted my wife and I to Vaughan. We are fortunate to have two wonderful daughters and both successful careers. But like most parents, I want to ensure that my children have brighter prospects and are afforded even greater opportunities for success than I have had. I'm proud, Madam Speaker, to be part of a government that believes that we must do for our kids and grandkids what our parents and grandparents did for us, to give us the promise of a better future. Toward that end, Budget 2016 has invested in Canadian families through the transformational program, the new Canada Child Benefit, that provides help to those families who need it the most with the high cost of raising children. The child benefit system we inherited from the previous Conservative government was complicated, consisting of a taxable, income-tested Canada Child Tax Benefit with two components, the base benefit and the National Child Benefit Supplement. It was a taxable universal child care benefit received by all families, regardless of income, even millionaires. Madam Speaker, it was a system that was both inadequate in that it did not provide families with the support they needed, as well as insufficiently targeted for those who needed it the most. Under the Conservative government, for example, families with very high incomes were still receiving benefits. That is not a Canadian value, Madam Speaker. Our government's new CCB is simpler. Families will receive a single payment every month. It's tax-free, so families will not have to pay back part of that amount received when they file their tax returns. As well, the new CCB is better targeted to those who need it the most, specifically low and middle income Canadian families. In addition, it is far more generous program than the ones it replaces. 9 out of 10 Canadians will receive higher monthly benefits, and it is estimated that the new Canada Child Benefit will lift approximately 300,000 children out of poverty. Further, as contained in Bill C-29, in 2020, the Canada Child Benefit will be indexed to keep pace with rising costs. In fact, Madam Speaker, let me please emphasize this point on how transformational Canada Child Benefit is in reducing income inequality. It is estimated that the CCB will allow for a reduction in the poverty rate for children in Canada from approximately 11.2% to 6.7%. Or, Madam Speaker, the Canada Child Benefit will lift approximately 40% of those children who currently find themselves living in poverty, in the very tragic situation of poverty. I was very fortunate to go to university, Madam Speaker, something that was not a possibility for my parents who immigrated to Canada through Pier 21 from Italy in the 1950s. My parents are ingenious and hardworking people who benefited from having union jobs with a decent pay and benefits. My parents helped as much as they could. Personally, I worked for summers. I worked summers to pay for universities at a pulp mill, grain elevator, and a fish cannery. And after school, including part-time jobs at McDonald's and Zellers to help save and ultimately pay my way through the 2 university degrees. But the costs for post-secondary education were significantly less than they are today. Now more than ever, in this highly scaled global economy, it is of paramount importance that post-secondary education remains affordable and accessible to Canadians. To compete in today's knowledge economy requires an educated and highly skilled workforce and more years of training. The cost of education, particularly professional training, has been increasing exponentially, and a greater financial worry has been placed on the shoulders of students and their families. We as legislators, need to work to ensure that young Canadians have access to meaningful work at the beginning of their careers, which means for paying for more education and training, so not as to be burdened by an enormous debt load. That is why our government put measures in Budget 2016 that make post-secondary education more affordable for students from low and middle-income families and provides provisions that make it easier for students to repay student loans once they enter the workforce. Budget 2016 also contains measures to help young Canadians gain experience, earn extra income, and find good jobs after graduation. Madam Speaker, this government knows that the roadmap to a better future lies in recognizing the needs of all Canadians, to our children, families, workers, and our most vulnerable populations, including our seniors. Madam Speaker, our seniors built this country, and I believe very strongly that we have a responsibility to assist those in their golden years of living with dignity and a secured retirement and treat them as valued members of our national community. It is another reason I am proud of our government's initiatives in Budget 2016. By rolling back the retirement age from 67 to 65, that placed $13,000 in the hands of new retirees over that 2-year period, increasing benefits to the guaranteed income supplement by nearly $1 billion, which will help nearly 1 million seniors, including 3/4 of which are women. This improvement in the GIS applied for single seniors. And we continue to make significant new investments to support seniors. In Budget 2016 is helping to ensure that our seniors have a dignified, comfortable, and secure retirement. In Bill C-29, we will amend the Old Age Security Act to provide that in the case of low-income couples who have to live apart for reasons not attributable to either of them, such as illness, and for example, one spouse being in a nursing home and the other staying at their primary residence, the amount of the allowance is to be based on the income of the allowance recipient only. This amendment ensures seniors are not unfairly penalized due to a situation they have no control over. Making our most vulnerable populations a priority shows this government's vision in working toward a smart, ethically responsible, and fair society. But fair-mindedness has always guided our government, Madam Speaker. As a matter of fairness, our government is looking to crack down on tax evasion and underground economic activity, aiming to close corporate loopholes, which threaten hardworking Canadians. Budget 2016, I'm proud to say, invested approximately $444 million over 5 years for the CRA to enhance its efforts to crack down on tax evasion and combat tax avoidance. In fact, Madam Speaker, I'm proud to state that I introduced the motion to the House of Commons Standing Committee of Finance, calling for an investigation into offshore tax havens. I am very pleased with the timely and decisive actions taken by our government to prevent tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance both at home and abroad. The Government of Canada will continue to address unintended tax advantages, including limiting the ability of wealthy individuals to use private corporations to inappropriately reduce or defer tax. In Bill C-29, we will amend the anti-avoidance rules in the Income Tax Act that prevents the multiplication of access to the small business deduction and the avoidance of the business limit and the taxable capital limit. In addition, in Bill C-29, to improve transparency and adhere to international standards, we will implement the country-by-country reporting standards as recommended by the OECD for corporations with operations in various geographies. In addition, we will introduce rules to prevent the avoidance of withholding tax or rents, royalties, and similar payments using back-to-back arrangements. Madam Speaker, there is still work to be done, but our initial efforts improve the fairness and integrity of Canada's tax system, as well as we will contribute to fiscal sustainability. Madam Speaker, we continue to work what is in the best interest of all Canadians to ensure that they have a confidence in our tax system, that no one unfairly subsidizes our tax system. Having worked on Wall Street and the Canadian banking sector, I can say firsthand that Canada has a world-renowned and one of the most stable financial or banking sectors. We were one of the only nations whose banks were left intact and came out unscathed from the 2000 global financial crisis. But our financial sector did not become world-renowned by accident, and it won't stay that way without continued maintenance and oversight by Canada's regulatory institutions, primarily through the Office of Superintendent of Financial Institutions. Madam Speaker, I had a first-hand view of the global financial crisis, and I can say that the regulations that govern our financial institutions, including strong lending practices, solid levels of Tier 1 capital held by the banks, along with the role of CMHC and OSFI, allow Canada to exit the global financial crisis in a stellar manner. Part 4 of Bill C-29 strengthens the framework regulating financial institutions, while balancing the need for stability and competition with the needs of consumers and businesses. Our government makes it clear that the shareholders and creditors of Canada's largest banks are responsible for their bank's risk, not taxpayers, not depositors. Canadians won't be stuck with the tab in the event of an economic shock. The changes proposed in the Bank Act reflect enhancements in the areas of corporate governance, access to basic banking services, disclosure of information, business practices, and public reporting. The same section amends the Financial Administration Act, the Bank of Canada Act, and the Mortgage and Housing Corporation Act to clarify certain powers of the Minister of Finance in relation to sound and efficient management of federal funds in the operational Crown corporations. It amends the Financial Administration Act to allow the Minister to lend, by way of auction, excess funds out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund, and with the authorization of the Governor and Council, may enter into contracts and agreements of a financial nature for the purposes of managing risks relating to the financial position of the Government of Canada. Also contained in Part 4 are amendments to the Bank of Canada Act to allow the Minister of Finance to delegate the bank the management of the lending of money to agent corporations. Again, Bill C-29, the second part of the Budget Implementation Act, puts in place measures that safeguard and strengthen Canada's world-renowned financial institutions. Madam Speaker, the government of Canada will always balance the need for stability and competition with the needs of consumers and businesses. Madam Speaker, Budget 2016 not only strengthens financial institutions, it strengthens our social institutions and our country's social safety net. Canada's Employment Insurance Program provides economic security to Canadians when they need it the most. That's why Bill C-29 contains several changes to the current employment insurance system. These changes to the eligibility rules make it easier for new workers and those re-entering the workforce to claim benefits. In addition to the changes in eligibility rules, the waiting period to receive unemployment insurance will also be reduced from 2 weeks to 1 week. These measures will provide unemployed workers with hundreds of dollars more when they need it the most. I am proud of our government's efforts to extend employment insurance benefits in regions that have been severely impacted by the collapse of the price of oil and other commodities. In Budget 2016, we promised those impacted by the cyclical downturn in commodity prices assistance, and we delivered with approximately a $2.5 billion investment over 2 fiscal years in employment insurance. Make no mistake, Madam Speaker, we all want Canadians working. We all want Canadians earning a good living with decent wages and good benefits. But in those times when Canadians are laid off, the Government of Canada will stand there with them to make sure that they are able to stand on their own two feet and as soon as possible get back to working. Madam Speaker, Division 6 part of the Act, which amends the Royal Canadian Mint Act, removes the requirement that the directors of the Mint have experience in respect of metal fabrication or production, industrial relations, or a related field. Madam Speaker, this amendment to the Royal Canadian Mint Act will allow the government to draw on a greater pool of candidates with diverse experiences. Madam Speaker, as I wind down my comments, I'd like to say a few words about a very important group of our society, our veterans. In November, we wear poppies as a symbol to remember the sacrifices made by Canadian veterans. The Government of Canada has a social covenant with all veterans and their families, a sacred obligation we must meet with both respect and gratitude. In the past, all too often, that covenant has unfortunately been breached. Canada's veterans have dedicated their lives to the defense of this nation, and they deserve our unwavering support. Bill C-29 gave back to veterans and who have given so much in the service to all Canadians by restoring to critical access to services, ensuring the long-term financial security disabled veterans so deserve. Provisions in this bill will mean that Canadian veterans will receive more local, in-person government services, as well as better access to case managers. In closing, I'd like to say how privileged I am and what an honor it is to represent and serve the residents of Vaughan Woodbridge, and how happy I have been able to speak on second reading on Bill C-29, the Budget Implementation Act. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Hamilton Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for his speech in the House on Bill C-29. But, Madam Speaker, I'm just wondering, never during the election did the Liberals ever suggest that they would invest in Canadian infrastructure by privatizing them. And I notice in the bill it has some fancy words by saying asset recycling and flywheel for investment. can I ask what the government means by this? Is it for privatization or not?
The RR for Vaughan Woodbridge.
I thank my friend from the honourable member from Hamilton Mountain. And what I say, our platform commitment was to invest $120 billion over a phase 1 and phase 2 period in infrastructure across Canada. I believe that is the right process for us to follow. We are in a period of low interest rates, and we need to invest in infrastructure to enable our economy to improve its productivity and to put it on a path of a higher long-term growth trajectory. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Central Okanagan-Similkameen. Nicola.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to thank the honourable member for his speech today. I admire his sincerity when he's specifically the pride that he shows not only in his area but his country, something I think we all could benefit from. What I'd like to ask the member is, in this Budget Implementation Act, Madam Speaker, there are comprehensive common reporting standards. A one-size-fits-all program put in place by Ottawa to meet its OECD commitments that really discriminates against small credit unions throughout this country and has caused a fair bit of grief, particularly given since we already have similar regulations to deal with American rules, known as FATCA. Madam Speaker, my question is, does the member support these these common reporting standards as they are, or does he believe, like many credit unions, that they do need to be changed and take into account the different structures of credit unions in this country?
The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Thank you for that question from my honourable member and an individual I've interacted with greatly in the House. What I will say is that after the financial crisis in 2008, what the world has moved to is common reporting standards for financial institutions globally across the board. What we are adopting in Bill C-29 are common reporting standards that all OECD countries have incorporated with. If there are situations which present themselves where they may be an anomaly, then those situations may be worth looking into. But at the same time, we need to ensure we have a strong and stable financial system and strong and stable financial institutions that Canadians can have faith in, and that we can allow to lend to borrowers, lend to creditors, to people wanting to buy a home, and to ensure that the banks are sound. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. L'honorable député de Laurentides.
The honourable member for Laurentides-Labelle.
In his speech, the member referred to his experience in the banking sector and the strength of our rules and regulations over the last while. I was wondering if the member could tell us a little bit what the impact of having a weaker regulatory structure in other countries had through the financial crisis in the last decade. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Thank you to my honourable colleague for that question. What I will say, Madam Speaker, is that if you look past the experience in the financial crisis, where regulatory structures were insufficient to deal with the complexity of products that were being sold in the market, where legislation, for example, with dealing with subprime mortgages or allowing no verification of income and jobs when lending by certain institutions globally, we ended up with a result, a very, very bad result, very tragic result, where we entered into a financial crisis not seen since the Great Depression. That wasn't the case in Canada. We've had a robust regulatory system for our banks, for our financial institutions. We've had lending practices that have been prudent, and we've had our banks come out of the financial crisis unscathed. And then you can't say that for many of the global banks, both in the United States and in Europe. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Hochelaga.
The honourable member for Hochelaga. Thank you, Madam Speaker. During the campaign, the Liberals had promised to lower the tax rate for SMEs from 11 to 9%. And we still haven't seen that in Bill C-29, which is a Budget Implementation Act. So when is that going to happen? And why hasn't it already been put into this act?
Thank you. Thank you to my honourable colleague. Small and medium-sized businesses are the backbone of our economy. Yesterday morning in Vaughan Woodbridge, I met a lot of local business owners at a health and wellness expo. I know these small and medium-sized businesses, most of the entrepreneurs, all the entrepreneurs, put their heart and passion into running their businesses. And it's something that I'm very, very concerned about, and I want to make sure they all succeed. In the budget 2016, we have lowered and we will lower employment insurance premiums. which is a very significant step for them. Our smaller business tax rate is very competitive here in Canada. It's very competitive globally. We offer a number of credits for our small SMEs, our SMEs in Canada, and again, they are the backbone of our Canadian economy. With our tax cut that we've introduced, which has benefited 9 million Canadians, which with our introduction of the Canada Child Benefit Form, which will allow Canadians on average $2,300 in more tax-free income a year. They'll spend this money at their local SME, at their local small business enterprise. And I think that's a good thing. We need aggregate demand to drive our economy, and that's what we're doing. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, I go back to the issue of credit unions and the common reporting standards. The credit unions, we've heard right across the country at pre-budget consultations, have had extreme issues with dealing with some of these FACTA regulations. I believe we heard from Desjardins that they have to submit 300 separate reports plus, 300 plus, versus while some other banks only have to produce one. These common reporting standards will add to that, particularly to smaller credit unions. Right now, the member heard from the Canadian Credit Union Association request the same kind of exemption for low risk, for under 2% of assets that are held by a foreign national in a credit union should be waived. Will the member agree that we should be looking at trying to make the burden on these small credit unions less to help grow our economy?
Honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, thank my colleague for his question. It is a very important question. When FACTA was introduced by the United States, there was much negotiations between our two countries on this issue. And what I will say is we do not want to overburden any institution with regulatory burden and extra costs. But we need to balance that with having institutions conforming to global financial standards, to standards that are introduced, whether it's the United States or Europe, that we agree to. And we have agreed to that. Of course, if there are anomalies that we need to look at, we should look at that. We don't want to hinder the intermediation process in financial institutions. We want to encourage competition amongst credit unions and banks, and we need to keep that healthy. I am very cognizant that many credit unions exist operate in rural communities, so we don't want to hinder their competitive landscape. We want to make sure they're there to serve their local residents, and I do fully understand that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires?
Questions and comments?
And comments? L'honorable.
The honourable member for Montmagny-les-Lacs, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's been made clear by the PBO that we left a surplus after the end of the past fiscal year, and we're very proud of that because in addition to having left a surplus, we had already set up a very ambitious infrastructure investment plan. But the Liberals decided to add to that, except the difference is that they are going to generate a deficit of over $30 billion this year to invest a little bit more in infrastructure. Can my colleague tell the House who's going to be stuck with that bill?
The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge. A very brief answer, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for that question. What is important is we maintain our fiscal capacity. And in Canada right now, we have the fiscal capacity to invest in our economy, to invest in Canadians, and to grow our economy. We've committed to, and the Minister of Finance said this last week, to maintain our commitments to reduce our debt-to-GDP ratio as we move along in our infrastructure program, and again in growing our country and making sure that all Canadians have the desire and want to work and have good paying jobs. Thank you, Madam Speaker.